Hello, it's your mad scientist of bonsai here. Um, I got a recent inquiry about taking cuttings, and the question was primarily directed toward taking cuttings of trident maples. Well, I answered that question in a reply directly to the person that asked about it. And generally speaking, when I give instructions or if I'm running my mouth about something, I'm talking about multiple things at one time. So that way I cover more ground and, then we can move on from there. But specifically, trident maple cuttings, in general, cuttings. So that's kind of the line that I'm going on. I've answered the question, and there are plenty of good responses to that question because it's a common question. But I noticed that it is actually one of the leading questions that's asked. How do I take cuttings? When do I take cuttings? And there are plenty of good responses on the internet, uh, plenty of books available that has that information in it. And again, I've responded to that, and I'm happy to do it. And so from this point, we're going to talk about taking cuttings in general, but you'll see that I'm talking also about trident maples. And so you can get the gist of it. And you always have to start from the basics, okay? You got to know how to grow a plant first, okay? And from that point, you can venture out and you can do whatever you need to. Again, there are good basic steps that's listed on the internet. There are books and such that covers this. But I'm the kind of person that I like breaking the rules, if you will. Uh, Not breaking the rules because of ignorance, but seeing how far I could push things, seeing where I could go with the information I learned over my many years of growing plants, plant nursery owner, propagating plants from my childhood, just because all of these things play into who I am now and what I do as a purveyor of bonsai, as a propagator of plants, and just for general knowledge, because knowledge is power, and the power to remember my name is pretty good. So as long as I'm exercising my brain, I'm good. Speaking of cuttings and such, that's a trident maple on a rock, and it is, or was formerly, a cutting, and it is the third part of a trinity of trees, bonsais that I have, same plant, if you will. So this plant right now on its own roots is probably like 12 years old now, and I put it on this rock um, late the year before last. So, here we are in the fall. It's September right now of 2018, and so that's how long this has been going. But again, on its own roots, about 12 years. I've had it in its own growing pot. I've had it in its own bonsai pot. In fact, the area here is dead, and it used to be out toward this way. And I took it to my bonsai club, and when I brought it home the same week that part died out, I had to do some critical care on this plant, and that's just experience, and I managed to save it. And if it were just something that I started from a seed or from a seedling or any other cutting, then I wouldn't have been so concerned about this plant. But because it's the third part of a tree that I'll show you in a little bit here, I really wanted to save that. And so it's coming along. I just cleaned up the pot, the tree, did some minor trimming so that the buds can set for next year. We're in our fall, and that means my leaves are beginning to turn, and depending on the tree and how moist it's been, how well it's been fertilized over the year, I'm getting leaf drop. Speaking of cuttings, that juniper right there, I started it from a cutting, okay? and the caliper right there is about 1/2 inch, and the entire plant I just wired into this configuration, but it was kind of, if you will, your typical cut and pot bonsai. From the branch over here, it just arched up and over toward that direction. All of that was pretty much horizontal, with the apex kind of crowned in over the top of the pot. But that was just a cutting, okay? And as you can see right here, I have more cuttings of juniper in the pot. And this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking outside of the standard. Wherever I have a pot, I'm liable to put some kind of a cutting into it. Now these I just repotted. I took them out of smaller rooting pots, or actually out of a group pot, and you know, I put 2 of the larger ones in that one pot, and as it grows, then I'll remove them and I'll style them, probably like I did the juniper I just showed you. This right here is a Trident maple, and believe it or not, it was just stuck in this pot as a cutting, and it has been here for a while now. The pot used to have herbs in it, you know, mint. It used to have you know, thyme, and they played out eventually, but here you can see the cutting. Now what I'm saying is, and not to offend anybody, but taking cuttings is not rocket science. And unless you've got, well, me personally, if I've got something that is precious to me, then I'll take more care with it, okay? As far as taking the cuttings, getting it isolated, getting it into a place where I'm sure that I'll get the water to it, and then I'll go from that point. But generally speaking, wherever I am, I'll take a cutting if I'm working on a tree. And these are cuttings of some Tridents that I just trimmed off of, not that tree, but the little root on the rock tree, and another plant that I had. Okay, speaking of cuttings, here we are right here. These are Zelkova cuttings, and those are Ficus Benjamin cuttings, and these are azalea cuttings that I just trimmed off of this azalea and another azalea that I have here. And those azalea cuttings are really small, and so, you know, I've taken my time with those. That Trident forest right there, they were cuttings, and then I placed them in that growing pot so that they can continue on. This Trident maple was a cutting, and you can see that it's root over rock style, and you can see the roots grasping that. And between now and next spring, in the repotting season, I will raise this up and secure the lower level of roots. And some of those cuttings from the Zelkova came from this plant. The Zelkovas that are there. Okay, and the Ficus, this is the tree that came off of. I took cuttings off of these Podocarpus, you know, different areas, and these I took and placed them directly in the ground out and back. Another Zelkova, some of the cuttings came from there also. Now, here we are about cuttings in general, and of course the Trident maple cuttings. Again, going back to the fact you need to know what time of year, and then we're going to start from that particular time of year to do your process, because even though I'm liable to take cuttings any time of the year, because I'm in an area that I can do that. I get freezes and frosts, but I can always work soil of some type, whether it's in a pot, in my greenhouse, whether it's even in the ground. My area in Northwest Florida does not freeze so hard that I cannot work the ground. Okay, these plants here are crepe myrtle, and I picked them up off of the side of the road. Someone had cut them down, and they're white flowering plants. I like the what I call cinnamon bark on this. You can see the tonality right here. Now this is kind of mildewy, so it's not as bright. Plus, I've still got some overcast in the sky today. But again, these are cuttings. Yes, cuttings. That is a 15-gallon pot, and I just took whatever I had, whatever soil that I dug out of the ground, whatever soil that I had, reclaimed bonsai soil, and I just stuck them in there. Okay, so we're going to try this. Let me just sit this down. And you can see the root ball. Okay, now follow me. When you're taking your cuttings, no matter what the size is, okay, always consider burying half the overall length, okay, as much as half, especially when you're into the larger caliper trunks. These are 3 to 4 inches in general. Yes, there are smaller ones, but even some of these did not take. And no matter who you are, what you're doing, you're not going to have 100% strike rate, typically, anyway. And let's see if I know what I'm talking about when I say about half the length. You can see this right here. You can see the green on that, so you know that's still alive. And that's 3/4 of an inch. Okay, now I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about here when I say put at least half of the length. When you've got a small diameter cutting, and this is about 6 feet tall, see, standing up there by the truck, that's about 6 feet tall. Okay, and again, not all of these, and these are the smaller ones. Can you imagine that? That's a larger piece. And no one ever is as gentle as I am with my plants. Yep, I believe in being very gentle. Now, believe it or not, though that's not rooted, though it's not sprouting out, it's still viable. I can see the green in it. Let's do this. Sorry about the filming, but that's why I'm mad, because there's nobody here to help me. All right, see how large that is? And that's the tallest branch here is about 6 feet, but it really doesn't matter for anything because it's so thin. But the idea here is that big thick trunk right there, just a cutting, and you can see the soil where it was in there. So that's actually a little more than, well, sorry about that. You can see the soil right here. And so that's about half, if you will, the depth of that, the height of the tree. So, and this was toward the center, and so was this piece right here. That was toward the center of the pot. So, and I'm not saying that just to say it was in the center. I'm telling you the best place to put your best pieces so that they will root. The center of the pot is the coolest. The center of the pot will hold moisture longer. And so as you go out toward the edge of the pot, the likelihood of your failure will increase. But again, it depends on how you water it, how you take care of it, because I've had pots with more or as much material in it as this, and I had a lot better strike rate, with as large pieces in it, just as large as this, I should say. Okay, so even this, that's a nice little piece to start with right there. But again, I took these because they're white flowering trees, and here we have some smaller cuttings. And so again, forgive the raw nature of my filming, but these are 3-4 inches, 2.5 inches in diameter, and all of this just happens to be reclaimed bonsai soil. Okay, so I've got pine bark in there, I've got turfus in there, there is perlite in there, and probably leaf mold from my mulch pile. Okay, so let's see here. I think I should never see a bonsai guy quite like me. 2 inches. When you look at that, that's 4.5 inches. This one is 3 3/4 inch. And you can say that each of these trunks are like 2 inches. So, like I said, depends on where you measure it or whatever. But these are I call these medium size cuttings. I have larger, yes I do. But before I go away to another place or location around the property, let me show you what I do. Okay, this is my carport. Okay, part of it anyway. I've got my supply locker here, table, tools, more tools. These I might move around, these may stay here. Supplies, pots, chemicals, supplies, containers, baskets. If I want to raise a plant up on the table as I'm working, I've got extra pots for that. Solar salt. You just put that on the weeds and such and kill stuff. Barrier material. But what I do is, as I'm working here, I typically keep some soil here, and this is what I call tan sand. It's just a fill dirt. Like if they're building a house in this area, this is what they use for the foundation. And I like this better than the builder sand, the beach sand, as it were, the white sand that is usually put into the cement mix. I like this better. It seemed to hold the moisture well enough for me, and it allows for drainage. And I've tried the white builder sand, and I just don't like it. It seems like that stuff molds up a lot quicker, and you know, fungus develops in it also. So anyway, so I might have a pot like that around, and I have pots here and there, and it, as I go about doing whatever I'm doing, I'm liable to just take a cutting. This right here is a Sarissa. The pot was for mother's tongue and other garden variety plants. I just took a cutting and stuck it in there, okay? We're gonna move on, and I'm talking about cuttings. As a matter of fact, before I do, let me just mention this Trident maple right here, okay? This is, okay, just over a ½ inch, okay? Now, when I take a cutting like this in the fall, and that's about a ½ inch, I strip off all of this stuff down here at the bottom. And I might take, you know, 4, 5, 6, 10 inches. I may even take even more than that. Let's do this. So I might even take a piece that long, okay? And so that's over 10 inches right there. That caliper will turn out to be about 9 inches. So we got 10 or 11 inches right there, okay? So what I'll do with this is, as I place it in the soil, I won't need that caliper anymore. As I place this in the soil, I'll take the ends and I'll just scrape down a little bit, and just as soon as I see green, I'll stop and do the other edges. Now, just for demonstration purpose, if I've got larger material, what I'll do is take my hammer or something heavy and I'll bash the edges like that, okay? So you can do it with this size, but I'll do this with a lot of the larger pieces. And then I'll take that, press it down into the soil, and again, as I said, about half the length of the branch. You can cut that off or not. And if I've got small pieces like this, depending on the season, I'll strip everything. And I love taking tips. So if you got a tip for me, never mind. And I just put that in there, and you see what I did? I did it without even thinking, but I pressed that soil in there to make sure that the material is in contact with the soil, okay? And then I'll water it in, okay? It's just as easy as that. Again, if it's ½ inch or less, all I do is scrape down the bark a little bit until I see the cambium layer, and that allows moisture to enter into the material to get things going, and there you have it. When I crush it like that, I give more surface area for the roots to develop. Moisture gets in and around the entire area, and so you've got more surface, having a better uptake of fluids and even hormones that might be in the soil, that might be in whatever you choose to put in there. Miracle-Gro, B1, Super Thrive, no matter what, okay, all of your chemicals will react with your material and give some assistance in growing. If you choose to use your mycorrhizome, that will help also. Okay, mycorrhizome is good for your nutrient uptake in your roots, but it would also help in starting seeds and things like that also. Talking about cuttings, these were cuttings, each of these, and that's on a piece of slate, and there are like 3 levels there. Okay, so if I take a cutting of this, and I'm just cutting the tops out of this elm, and a lot of times what I do is simply this. Wherever I'm standing, if I don't have a pot around, I just stick them right there in the ground, firm it in, then I water it in, not a problem. See, and I say this again, it's not rocket science. If you've got an abundance of it, do it where it makes sense for you, because if you're pulling weeds and cleaning up between things, then you're going to destroy your cuttings. Okay? When I have a lot of weeds, I use that to my advantage. It gives shade to the material that I'm growing, and it also preserves, whether you believe it or not, a little bit more moisture on these hot summer days. Ground mulch will do that also, but I've got so much that at this point I haven't gotten around to putting all the ground mulch down, and so I use the weeds, understanding the cycle. So when it cools off, the weeds come out, the plants get fertilized, and the soil gets tilled around it, adding more nutrients deeper and refreshing the area for aeration. This was a cut air layer from this plant right here, and it was so tall the wind came in during one of our summer storms and broke the plant over. So what I did was take 1 inch or 2 of the trunk material that is above the air layer, and it is under the soil, and you can see green leaves, so that is still working. Once that comes out in the spring, I'll reassess it just for grins and giggles, because I was air layering it, and so I'll see if I could salvage it. I know we're not talking about air layer, but I cannot talk about cuttings without talking about the benefits of air layer. So you can see this pot here, and my demonstration Trident maple came from the top of that. But I have no doubt that this is already rooted, but I am going to allow it to ride and continue to grow. So we're talking about cuttings. Sarissas, we're right here. These little white flowers you see are sarissas, and whether you take cuttings or whether you pinch them, now again, you could spend your whole life stripping out all of these leaves, as is the typical method, you know, taking the leaves down. See, that's how you generally do that, and usually you're told to take a little bitty deal like that. What's that, 3 or 4 inches? And then you place that in the pot separate. Nonsense, my good man, nonsense. I just shove that stuff down in there just like that. However long it is, however tall it is, it doesn't matter. Sarissa is one of those plants that will fall on the ground and root if the moisture is right. Crepe myrtle's the same for that matter. So you just go about, get your handful of Sarissa cuttings, you know, just whatever you got. And yeah, if you want to cut them back, cut them in half, stick them like that, okay? And, oops, excuse me. Get you a good hole, stick them in the pot. Sorry. And just plant them. You don't have to strip the leaves off of the bottom. And again, depending on how you are working, you know, how many plants you got to do. If you're doing, you know, 10, 20, 30 plants, fine. Strip the bottoms, you know, put them in one by one. Enjoy your time. But if you're going to do hundreds of these things, they'll do just fine. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a Sarissa. I stuck right in the ground. Now these are Sarissas that I've started from cuttings, but I planted them here along the border, right along these trident maples. Okay, so I'm getting the Sarissas to grow right here in the vicinity of these trident maples, which is right out front, getting good sunlight, getting good water and fertilization. And now these are pink Sarissas, okay? So going back to me saying, if you've got plants that are precious, then you want to take more time with it. I take more time with my pink Sarissas than I do with, you know, the white Sarissas that you just saw there. But again, not being rocket science, these right here were just cuttings that I took and stuck right in this pot shortly after I planted this juniper in this pot to grow it out, okay? I've been growing this juniper in this container probably for 3 years now. I've had the juniper growing probably 6 years total, but I just wanted a larger juniper that I can do bonsai work with, and I just up pot the juniper, okay, just like this. I bought that and I've been growing it, and I'll take cuttings from those. I've got junipers in the ground. Some of these were cuttings, some were small pots that I bought, and not quite a cutting, but that is an air-layered 16-foot tall Japanese green maple. And when we talk about cuttings, crepe myrtles are one of the things that you can readily grow from a cutting no matter where, okay? So I'll show you here. See the crepe myrtles? And you can see they have seed pods on the top. You can see the blooms there. So it's not a biggie. All you have to do is make sure that you get good contact. Ouch. Down into the soil. And that's all you have to do. keep it watered, not a problem. Now these crepe myrtles you see here, I dug crepe myrtles out of the ground, and from the root bits and pieces, these came up again. Okay, these that you're looking at right now with the flowers, very pretty. These are basically root cuttings. Now, I expected that, so I will be digging these up at any point now, in part to clean out this bed, because I'm growing my Japanese green maples in here, and basically some of my ornamentals, roses, stevia plant. I even have a bay leaf tree there. You can see the pots for air layering. This is a trident maple. And I've got air layers on there. So cuttings, air layers, to me they go hand in hand. You know, they go hand in hand. For me, this is a season that my larger cuttings develop better. And so I take larger cuttings from this time through the winter, especially on my trident maples. I'm not sure if the sunlight is going to let it be seen, but there's the winged elm. Got a couple of those. They were cuttings that I placed there, and they've more than doubled in their size over this one season. So if you have the ground to put your cuttings in, it will make it all the more effective. This tree right here, I've got I think 4 or 5. That right there, these are small leaf trident maples, and they were fused together with your regular trident maples. So if you can see this right here, and this right here, those branches are fused, and let's see if I can get you a good shot. This right here, you can see right there, I've just about covered it up to get some good rooting, but that's your normal trident maple that I use for a rootstock to cut this off of the main tree. Since I'm talking about cuttings, which is a form of propagation, I'm throwing in this fusing. Oh, this is even better. You can see where this little small tree, that's the normal regular trident maple, and this side over here is the small leaf trident maple. And so now I've got that growing, and as it grows, hopefully roots will develop on the bottom side of this small leaf trident maple. And I've got others. I've got others here and elsewhere. Small leaf trident maples are difficult, if not just simply notorious for not rooting from cuttings. So if you get a hold of small leaf trident maples, you may consider doing fusion grafts and air layers. This part actually is an air layer. That's about 2.5 inches, and all these others are fused together. That trunk right there is about 3 inches on a regular trident maple, and so I'll be cutting it down, but In the meantime, I decided to try and air layer some of that out. So anyway, air layers, fusion grafts, cuttings, they all go hand in hand. But again, when it comes to taking cuttings, don't be afraid to take large cuttings. Kind of lost my wagon train there for a moment. I was going to show you what you can do as far as taking cuttings, okay? These are crepe myrtles. Believe it or not, they're alive. And that is a cutting, okay? I chainsawed it off of a larger crepe myrtle. That'll give you a size comparison. Okay, so that's a cutting, and I've got large pieces there, large pieces there, and like I said, that bucket of crepe myrtle cuttings that I took, I've got 2 more like it in the back. And you can see that right there. That's a crepe myrtle, and that was a cutting. And it was actually struck in the ground, not in the pot. And like I said, the weeds, I don't obsess over the weeds. I just move them when I need to move them. They'll be just fine. So, speaking of cuttings, these pots right here are cuttings of Japanese green mound junipers, Procumbians nana, and some of these will be worked this fall and spring. You can work, me personally, I can work my junipers any time of the year. It doesn't matter to me. Yes, I have to take more precautions on how deep I go into the roots and how much I cut. But again, with time and experience, all of that comes to you. Generally speaking, folks would not bare root, you know, these junipers in the middle of the summer or something like that, whereas someone else just might, but they have their techniques and their ways of doing things. I've seen persons that would bare root trident maples in June, and you know, it works for them. Now again, depending on the age of the plant, the vigor of the plant, not a problem. It's not a strange thing to understand the method and the technique there. So bare rooting plants, that's fine, but you got to know what you're doing. Cuttings, these are cuttings of sarissas. Okay, these are pink, so they're precious, and I've got them in pots, and I'm watching them. I do my watering back here, but these are a different kind of sarissa. These are even more precious than my pinks because of the leaf style and how they actually grow out. I like these for the growth habit and the leaf form more so than the pinks. Now the pinks I love because of the color. The leaves on these pinks are pretty similar to those on the whites as far as these Ceristas go. And so no difference. But these leaves are more elongated, and again, the way the trunk grows, it just fascinates me. So I'm more taken with that. Why am I talking about this and just meandering along? Because I'm talking about taking cuttings, okay? It's not rocket science. So, this tree right here, and I'm trying to get the sun to my back. That right there is a cutting. I dug a hole right there and planted this. And this is part of those same trees that I dug up out or pulled up out of that bucket to show cuttings. And that's almost 3 feet tall to the wood, the thickest part of the wood, okay, as a cutting. And so there's at least a foot underneath the ground. So this was a whole tree, if you will, in one season. I got these cuttings in February, right around the NASCAR Daytona 500 time. I was at a buddy's house and we were watching the race. And I noticed someone in his community had cut these trees back. And so they had been sitting out there for how long? I don't know. I do not know. But I can almost assure you they were there for at least a week. But all of the crepe myrtles, well, nearly all of the crepe myrtles that I own are from cuttings. And I used to pick them up 6, 8 feet or more, okay, after I got off from work. And I would put them in the big 15. Here's another crepe myrtle, just like the one that rooted. This was not as successful, but see that? It's still alive. So it will stay there until next year, where it would probably spring out, okay? That blue tub, and there's another blue tub. And you can see the green foliage. See? Now, that's what I was saying. I have these also that took. And as a matter of fact, this tree just may even bloom before this winter. Though it's all started from a cutting, it could very well bloom this year. That was part of the top of the tree that the owner cut out, which has all of the growing materials in it, your adventitious buds and or your latent buds, whatever you want to call them. And so everything was there already. And once I took the plant, got it into the ground, boom, bam, there you have it. And here I have more crepe myrtles. Not quite a cutting, but this was a root, okay? And I turned it upright. All of this was underground as a root. And very little of this, if you can see it now, all of that was underground as a root. And I dug down 2 or 3 feet, dug it up, cut the top out of it, and that is probably close to 30 years old. And I've got more crepe myrtles in the bushes. Well, somebody said, no matter what you say, if you say in the bushes at the end, it won't sound crazy in the bushes. So I get all of my cuttings right here from my own material in the bushes. And I make my own trees in the bushes. Now, these Japanese green maples were air layers in the bushes. I'll grow them off for this season. I'll pot them up and a more suitable container or bonsai pot, depending on how I like them, if I want to keep it for myself or not, then that's how I'll deal with it. And you can see right here, trident maple with roots over rock. That was a cutting in the bushes. Nothing but cuttings. And so it's easy to take cuttings, and I'm just giving you this talk, and I'm saying a lot of the common everyday things, but it's just that plain and just that simple. These little pots, cuttings, all of these, bottle brush plant, Procumbiums nana, Japanese green maple, excuse me, elms. They're just cuttings, and I don't know if you could see that on the camera, but that little elm that's sitting there, and all of that greenery right there, these are cuttings that I took as I worked right here on my back porch, and I stuck them in the ground. Cuttings, Japanese green maple. I had leftover soil, reclaimed bonsai soil. That was a pot that something had failed in a few years ago. The pot was just sitting there. I took these rose bush cuttings. This is a purple homestead kind of a rose. And as you can see, lots of greenery. We even have growth there. And we're doing fine. You can see the buds starting to swell here on these Japanese green maple. And that was probably in August, mid-August or so, when I took these. Okay, so it was hot, yes. And these are typically larger than what's called for in the book, but the way I dealt with that is to simply take the leaves off, and then I stuck them, okay? And fig tree just stuck right in the ground. So that was a failed air layer. I took it off too early, so I treated it like a cutting. And you can see the buds even it's beginning to leaf out. See these pans? They're here for a reason. I keep high levels of moisture. I don't have a misting system where you can put it on a timer for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or whatever, continually cycling. So I keep my plants in an area where I can water them often, and even to let them sit in water even longer. For example, this little doofer right there, that's a Sarissa, and I just sit the plant in it, and